Sadly, we have lost another person this year, Queen Elizabeth II. So guys, I'm just going to make a short tribute video. I think it's going to be a little bit longer, but I think I'll just keep it as short as possible. But I'm just gonna tell of what this is, the tribute of the Queen Elizabeth II. Elizabeth was born on 21st of April 1926 during the reign of her paternal grandfather, King George V. Her father, Prince Albert, Duke of York, was the second son of the king. Her mother, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, Duchess of York, later Queen Elizabeth, the Queen's mother, was the youngest daughter of Scottish aristocrat Claude Bowes-Lyon, 14th Earl of Strathmore and Kingsthorne. At the host London home, she was delivered by cesarean section. She was baptized by the Anglican Archbishop of York, Cosmo Lang, in the private chapel, Buckingham Palace, on 29th of May, and named Elizabeth after her mother, Alexandra, her provincial grandmother, who had died 6 months earlier, and Mary after her potential grandmother, called Lilibert by her close family. Based on what she was called herself, at first she was cherished by her grandfather, George V, whom she was affectionately called Grandpa England, and regular visits during his serious illness in 1929 were credited in popular press by later biographers with raising his spirits and aiding his recovery. Elizabeth's only sibling, Princess Margaret, was born in 1930. The two princesses were educated at home under supervision of their mother and their governess, Marian Crawford. Lessons concentrated on history, language, literature, and music. Crawford published a biography of Elizabeth of Margaret's childhood years and entitled The Little Princesses in 1950. Much to the dismay of the royal family, the book describes Elizabeth's love of horses and dogs, her orderliness, and her attitude of responsibility. Others echoed such observations. Winston Churchill decided Elizabeth, when she was 2, as a character, she was an air of authority and reflectiveness. Astonishing an infant, her cousin Margaret Rhodes described her as a jolly little girl, but fundamentally sensible and well-behaved. In September 1939, Britain entered the Second World War. Lord Hailsham suggested that Princess Elizabeth and Margaret should be evacuated to Canada and avoid the frequent aerial bombings of London by the Luftwaffe. This was rejected by her mother, who declared, "The children won't go without me. I won't live without the king, and the king will never leave." The princesses stayed at Balmoral Castle, Scotland, until Christmas 1939, when they moved to Sandringham House, Norfolk. From February to May 1940, they lived at the Royal Lodge, Windsor, until moving to Windsor Castle, where they lived for the next 5 years. At the end of the war in Europe, on Victory in Europe Day, Elizabeth and Margaret mingled in Continental with the celebrating crowds in the streets of London. It was later when Princess Elizabeth went on her first overseas tour in 1947, accompanying her parents through the Southern Africa. During the tour, in a broadcast to the British Commonwealth on her 21st birthday, she had made the following pledge. Elizabeth met her future husband, Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, in 1934 and again in 1937. They were second cousins once removed through King Christian IX of Denmark, and the third cousins through the Queen Victoria. After meeting the third time at the Royal Naval College in Danforth in 1939 July, Elizabeth, though was only 13 years old, says she fell in love with Philip, and they began to exchange letters. She was 21 when their engagement was officially announced on 9th of July 1947. Reign. George VI's health declined during 1951, and Elizabeth frequently stood at him at public events. When she toured Canada and visited President Harry Truman in Washington, D.C. in October 1951, her private secretary Martin Cheris carried a draft accession declaration in case of the king's death while she was on tour. In early 1952, Elizabeth and Philip set out on a tour of Australia and New Zealand by the way of Kenya. On February 6, 1952, they have just returned to their Kenyan home, Sagana Lodge, and after a night spent at Treetops Hotel when the word arrived in the death of George V.I. and Elizabeth consequent accession on the throne with immediate effect. Philip broke the news to the new queen. She chose to retain Elizabeth as her regnal name. Thus she was called Elizabeth II, which offended many Scots, as she was the first Elizabeth to rule in Scotland. She was proclaimed queen throughout her realms, and the royalty hastily returned to the United Kingdom. Elizabeth and Philip moved into Buckingham Palace. From Elizabeth's birth onwards to the British Empire continued its transformation into the Commonwealth of Nations. By the time her accession in 1952, her role as head of multiple independent states which have already established. In 1953, Elizabeth and her husband embarked in a 7-month round-the-world tour, visiting 13 countries and covering more than 40,000 miles by land, sea, and air. She became the first reigning monarch of Australia and New Zealand to visit those nations. During the tour, crowds were immense. 3/4 of the population of Australia were estimated to have seen her. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth made hundreds of state visits to other countries and tours of the Commonwealth. She was the most widely travelled head of state. The 1960s and 70s was an acceleration in the decolonization of Africa and the Caribbean. More than 20 countries gained independence from Britain as part of the planned transition to self-government. In 1965, however, the Rhodesian Prime Minister Ian Smith is in opposition to move towards the majority rule, and literally declared independence while expressing loyalty and devotion to Elizabeth, declaring her Queen of Rhodesia. Though Elizabeth formally dismissed him from the international community, applied sanctions against Rhodesia. His regime survived over a decade as Britain's ties into its former empire weakened. The British government sought every of the European community, a goal it achieved in 1973. In 1977, Elizabeth marked the Silver Jubilee for her accession. Parties and events took place throughout the Commonwealth, many coinciding with her associated national and Commonwealth tours. The celebrations reaffirmed Elizabeth's popularity despite virtually coincident negative press coverage of Princess Margaret's separation from her husband, Lord Snowdon. In 1978, Elizabeth endured a state visit to the United Kingdom by Romania's communist leader Nicolae Ceausescu, his wife Elena. Through privately, she thought they had blood on their hands. The following year brought 2 blows. One was unmasking of Anthony Blunt, former surveyor of Queen's Pictures, as a communist spy. The other was an assassination of her relative-in-law, Lord Mountbatten, by the Provisional Irish Republican Army. During the 1981 Trooping the Colour ceremony 6 weeks before the wedding of Prince Charles and the Lady Diana Spencer, 6 shots were fired at Elizabeth from close range as she rode down the Mall, London, on her horse Burmese. Police later discovered the shots were blanks. The 17-year-old assassin Marcus Sergian was sentenced 5 years in prison and released after 3. Elizabeth's composure and skill in controlling her mount were widely praised. That October, Elizabeth was subject to another attack while on a visit to Dunedin, New Zealand. Christopher John Lewis, who was 17-year-old, fired a shot with a .22 rifle from the 5th floor from a building overlooking the parade but missed. Lewis was arrested but never charged with attempted murder or treason, and sentenced to 3 years in jail for unlawful possession and discharge of a firearm. 2 years into his sentence, he attempted to escape a psychiatric hospital with the intention of assassinating Charles, who was visiting the country with Diana and her son Prince William. In the wake of coalition victory in the Gulf War, Elizabeth became the first British monarch to address a joint meeting of the United States Congress in May 1991. On the eve of the new millennium, Elizabeth and Duke of Edinburgh boarded a vessel from Southwark, bound at a Millennium Dome. Before passing under the Tower Bridge, Elizabeth lit the national anthem beacon of the Pool of London using a laser torch. Shortly before midnight, she officially opened the dome during the signing of Auld Lang Syne. Elizabeth held her hands with the Duke and British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Diamond Jubilee and Longevity. Elizabeth's 2012 Diamond Jubilee marked 60 years on the throne, and celebrations were held throughout her realms, the wider Commonwealth and beyond. She and her husband undertook an extensive tour of the United Kingdom, while her children and grandchildren embarked on royal tours of the Commonwealth states of her behalf. On 4th of June, Jubilee beacons were lit around the world. While touring Manchester as part of her Jubilee celebrations, Elizabeth made a surprise appearance at the wedding party at Manchester Town Hall, which then made international headlines. In November, Elizabeth and her husband celebrated their blue sapphire wedding anniversary, 65th. On 18th December, she became the first British sovereign to attend a peacetime cabinet meeting since George III in 1781. On 19th of March 2020, as COVID-19 pandemic hit the United Kingdom, Elizabeth moved to Windsor Castle and sequestered there as a precaution. Public engagements were cancelled, and Windsor Castle followed a strict sanitary protocol named HMS Bubble. Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee began on 6th of February 2022, marking 70 years since she acceded to the throne of her father's death. On the eve of the date, she had a reception of Sandringham House of Pensioners, local women's institute members and charity volunteers. In her accession day message, Elizabeth renewed her commitment of a lifetime of public service, which she had originally made in 1947. Death. On 8th of September 2022, Buckingham Palace announced that Elizabeth was under medical supervision at Balmoral Castle after doctors expressed concern. The statement read, "The following further evaluation this morning, Queen Elizabeth's doctors were concerned for Her Majesty's health and have recommended she remain under medical supervision. The Queen remains uncomfortable and at Balmoral." Elizabeth's 4 children, along with her daughters-in-laws and grandsons, Prince William and Prince Harry, travelled to Balmoral. Her death was confirmed at the evening at 6:30. Setting in motion Operation London Bridge, and because she died in Scotland, Operation Unicorn. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you like this video, please leave a like, and whenever another celebrity or another legend has passed away, I'll make a tribute video about them. Thank you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video.